Hello, my name is Euan Crumley, and welcome to the latest episode of the Athletics Weekly podcast. In each show, we bring you everything you need to know from the world of run, jump, and throw, analysing the biggest stories and speaking to key names from the sport. For this episode, we're going to mirror the November issue of AW magazine, which is out now, and look at the current world of distance running. For this episode, we're going to mirror the November issue of AW magazine, which is out now, and look at the current world of distance running. Our guest is Chris Thompson, a two-time Olympian and a European 10,000 metre silver medalist who recently called time on his lengthy career. Tomo likes a good chat, and we'll be hearing plenty from him later on a number of topics. We've got a lot to get through in the meantime though, and the marathon majors year has just drawn to a close following the running of the New York City Marathon, but it was in Chicago recently where the biggest headlines were made. Kenya's Ruth Chepngetich broke the women's marathon world record with a run of 2:09.56 that has caused quite a stir, to say the least. It's also award season, and in the December issue of AW, we'll be announcing the winners of our annual Readers' Awards. Plus, the Commonwealth Games are coming back to Glasgow, and it's that brilliant time of year again when the mud, sweat, and tears of cross-country come into full focus. To talk about all of that and more, I'm joined by AW Head of Digital, Jason Henderson. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Euan.
As we said there, Jason, we're going to concentrate for the first part of this episode on distance running. It's the thrust of the current issue of AW magazine as well. And I guess it's the area where most people can relate to what the elite competitors are doing. As a keen distance runner yourself, it has a lot to offer.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of athletes, whatever their events, they often end up running, longer distances at some stage. I remember the javelin thrower Steve Backley. He started life as a cross-country runner, and then very recently, the former British 400-metre hurdler Megan Beasley, she made an appearance at the English National Road Relay Championships at Sutton Park, even though her specialist event was 400-metre hurdles in the past. So yeah, I think a lot of athletes, whatever their events, they end up running longer distances at some stage. So it's something that everybody can relate to.
Yeah, the one run that I've just mentioned there that people I think are still struggling to relate to is what Ruth Chepngetich did in Chicago. I think it's the obvious place to start for this episode. I mean, that women's world marathon record. I mean, we all marvelled at Paula Radcliffe when she ran 2:15.25 in 2003. And then I think we were all still getting our heads around the fact that Tigges Assefa ran 2:11.53 in Berlin last year. So to see someone running 2:09.56, I mean, it had a lot of people scratching their heads and their jaws on the floor, I guess.
Yeah, it was ridiculously fast. I was lucky enough to be in London when Paula ran her 2:15.25, which is a time which is etched in my memory, and it was described as a quantum leap performance at the time. And I was sitting next to an athletics journalist called Mel Watman, and he sat watching that record unfold, and he was amazed. And he said that if you'd mentioned the idea of a woman running a marathon at any kind of decent speed back in, say, the 1960s, if you'd mentioned the idea then, let alone 2 hours 15, nobody would have believed you. It just would have been the stuff of science fiction. And that record lasted for a number of years, and now we've seen it drop again and again. So it's now gone inside 2:10, which is just, I mean, everybody knows the reaction globally. I mean, it's people have just been absolutely amazed that a woman has been able to run a marathon so quickly.
Yeah, and the reaction has been interesting as well, in that there have been just as many people being skeptical about the run as there have sort of celebrating it. What have you made of the reaction towards it?
Yeah, it's a shame, really. It's disappointing, and I guess it shows where athletics is as a sport, in that people see these performances and they struggle to fully embrace them. I think athletics has often been compared to cycling, where we see great cycling performances and people winning the Tour de France, and and people don't quite know whether to celebrate the victories and the performances, or whether just to remain quite dubious. And we've seen the same with this latest women's world record. I mean, there's a lot made of the shoes. I often think the nutrition factor is a little bit underplayed as well. I think that the modern nutrition that's used these days, I think it's helped athletes avoid hitting the wall and to stay the course in the latter stages of a marathon. I mean, as recently as the Haile Gebrselassie era in marathons, which is, I guess, only 15, 20 years ago, he did his debut marathon. He only had water. He didn't have any energy drink of any kind. And the energy drinks these days are just so much better than before. So I think that's a big factor. But then there are also other factors which some journalists and YouTubers, etc., have tried to imply without getting themselves sued. So they've had to be quite careful with the words that they choose. I probably don't need to say any more at that stage. And it is sad that people are thinking that way, but I guess it's just natural, and it kind of shows where the sport is at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess it's natural as well when there is a performance that sort of takes the event forward to such an extent. And speaking to a few people from sort of inside the sport as well, they weren't necessarily shocked that this has happened, just because of the rate, as you say, that the sport is sort of hurtling forward just now, whether that be through technology, or through the sort of the nutrition, or just the advances that are being made just now.
I think, as you say, the opinion has been quite cynical generally. Maybe the record breaking performance itself wasn't so much of a surprise, but it's just, I don't know, just breaking 2:10. It just seems sort of otherworldly. I think it's faster than a lot of top male marathon runners have managed in recent years. I think I saw a statistic saying it was quicker than Mark Scott, the British distance runner, had managed in the marathon. I think Eilish McColgan ran a 5K race recently, and she ran that 5K about, I think it was almost 20 seconds slower than the pace that Ruth Chepngetich had run in the marathon, and yet she kept it up for a whole marathon. It's just statistics that are just hard to comprehend. And as I say, I think a lot of people they struggle to think it's just down to the shoes and the nutrition, because of course there are lots of other athletes. Well, every other athlete in the world now can use very similar shoes and nutrition. It's not that hard to get hold of. Even if we decided to lace up some shoes and tackle a marathon next weekend, we could probably get very similar shoes and the same nutritional drinks and gels. It's not very hard. So I don't know. It's a very thorny topic, isn't it? And whenever journalists like ourselves talk about it, we have to be quite careful in what we say, I think.
Yeah, and then just because there are so many different strands to it, I think, as well. And Catherine Merry, who writes a column for AW every month, I think she put it very well. Yeah. She, I think she put it very well in that her first reaction was to go, wow. And then she said, whenever there's a big performance like this in athletics, she tends to have a sort of a checklist that she goes through to sort of think about, the merits of the performance and things. And I think a lot of people have been kind of doing that as well. But yeah, in one respect, it's fantastic in that it brings so much attention to the sport. But yeah, you do worry at times whether that's the correct sort of attention, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think one thing's certainly true. Chepngetich is a phenomenal runner. Yeah. Whatever you might think. I remember we were both standing on the roadside in Doha at the World Championships 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago to the day. and for these midnight marathons, which they held to avoid the real searing heat of the daytime, and it was like carnage. Runners just dropping out left, right, and centre. I mean, we were standing there, just standing and walking around, and we were dripping with sweat just with the heat. It gone midnight, and lots of runners, including I remember Britain's Charlotte Purdue that day dropped out, and lots of others. And yet Chepngetich came through and she won the race. I remember her sprinting through the line, and she managed to just beat everybody that day. She was the toughest athlete in the field at a world championship. So there's no doubt she's a phenomenal runner. But yeah, sub 2:10. It's not a women's marathon performance that we ever thought we'd see anytime soon.
Yeah, well, our guest Chris Thompson has a few thoughts on this too, and they formed part of a revealing interview that also appears in the November issue of AW. A hugely talented junior who beat Mo Farah to the European Under-23 5,000 metre title. At the age of 43, Chris has brought the curtain down on a career that saw him compete at the 2012 and 2021 Olympics. He memorably won the marathon trial at Kew Gardens, for those who remember that. And his career has also included more than a fair share of ups and downs and plenty of injury battles. Myself and Chris talked about a wide range of topics, from the image that athletics projects of itself to the outside world, to what life lessons you can learn from being a distance runner. I started, though, by asking him about the biggest changes he's seen to the sport during his time involved in it.
One of the things that I think was great from my perspective is I was finally getting help. Financially, in terms of, well, I wasn't initially, I had to earn that, but it was like I wasn't reliant on the funding, the lottery funding, and that is obviously was great during the noughties and how much it helped me. But then I was kind of injured and I lost a lot of that. And then when I joined the Oregon Track Club, one of the professionalism and the help and everything around that really helped propel myself and Gemma, and Mark Rowland being the coach. And that kind of, it felt like, as much as we weren't the first team, it was one of the earlier teams. And then that seemed to just spawn lots and lots and lots of, and since then, more brands have come in through On, Hoka, and other brands like who have been around a while, like Puma, but lots of brands have started investing in these kind of groups. And it's massively, for me, I feel like has changed the landscape of how the sport is. So a very, very long answer to your question. I feel like before it was very, there wasn't as much professionalism around it. It was almost like federationally based, and very much like you're at the mercy of, if you were lucky to get a bit of sponsorship from someone off your own back, but you were kind of at the mercy of how much the federation believed in you, helped you. And if you formed your own group, now there's almost professional teams, but branded teams. Obviously we have the club system that's around. And I think that's massively changed the mindset of athletes. The youngsters today are, the big thing I think that's changed, and compared to when I was young, was they can see a pathway to being a professional athlete. They can see it, they can believe it, they can desire it, they can want it. And there is, of sorts, you can see the way you can sort of worm your way to it. But certainly when I was young, it was like, if someone said to me where, there was no clear, obvious pathway other than just run quicker. And even if I run quicker, I didn't know where I would be, how I'd do, what that would mean or anything. It was like, I'd have potentially a one-on-one relationship with a sponsor. My first sponsor was Adidas. It was just kit. That's all it was when I was a junior, but it was it was just a personal relationship with me and them. It was just a transaction. There was no relationship in terms of as part of a team or a coach or anything like that. So I think in terms of the professionalism in that sense, and in terms of a wider spectrum, has massively changed. And the amount of races, the amount of things that are going on has really changed. My biggest asset in my life as a person and in sport was my resilience to never give up. I just refused. I'm a stubborn, I can now say stubborn middle-aged man. And that was born or created in my teenage years in terms of the stubbornness with sport. I'm stubborn in everything, but just with sport specifically was born then because I had such an amazing experience with the sport as a teenager, with my friends, with everyone I interacted with, from working with, it was then British Athletics or whatever the name of it was, the athletes, the teammates, everyone at Aldershot, that I at school, everything was just so positive.
Yeah,
that was what fueled me going to keep coming back, because I'd fallen in love with I never fell in love with running. I fell in love with what the sport had to offer. Okay. And I think I've heard Jake Whiteman say that, he doesn't love running, but he loves competing, and that's the thing for me. That's what I fell in love with: the competing, the companionship, that the people involved in the sport. I played a bit of football when I was younger, and I did a few bits, but honestly, the people that, I don't think I'm biased in saying this, I think people by and large within athletics are awesome people. They're just really good people. They're just, if you've been a distance runner, and I'm going to isolate distance running because I can't speak for other events, and that's not because it's not them, it's just, but if you're a distance runner, my word, you understand what hard work is. Self-punishment, resilience, perseverance. My word, you go through being a distance runner in your life for any period of time, I defy you not to come out a better person with yourself. Your relationship with yourself improves. And when your relationship with yourself improves, your relationship with everyone else improves, because you go through experiences like nothing else. And I think by and large, that's why I got sucked in, because it was just like, you're just meeting just like-minded, good people when you're not having to deal with real world rubbish.
Yeah. And you can read more from that interview with Chris in the November issue of AW Magazine, which is out now. Jason, I love the way you spoke about what distance running has taught him, not just in a sporting sense. We are both runners, and I can think of a number of things that running's taught me, particularly how to be to cope with being humbled by physical exercise. But what would you say the biggest lesson sort of running or being involved in the sport has taught you?
I don't know. I think Tomo puts it better than anybody in the feature that you've written on him, and the clips that we've got in this podcast, where he just describes, running, just the qualities that you need in running. They kind of carry through to the rest of your life. All these qualities of persistence and determination and the ability to endure, and discipline when it comes to training, and all of these things. It's just, if you have these qualities as a runner, then they often carry through to other areas, hopefully. I have to say, it was a really good interview that you did with Tomo. I very much enjoyed it. The intro to the feature piece in the magazine itself made me laugh as well, when you wrote that I think when you'd done the interview with him, he said that you'd been Tomoed, which apparently was a phrase. I know him fairly well, but I'd never heard that before, so it made me laugh. I think lots of us have been Tomoed at some stage, but it's always a pleasure, isn't it?
It always is. Chris, as I mentioned, likes to chat, and he's always worth listening to. I mean, there really can't be many people out there who've experienced, as much around the sport, good or bad, as him. So many life lessons, or so many sporting lessons that he can sort of impart. And I know he's already involved in the coaching side of things, and I do hope he's not lost to the sport, because he still has a huge amount to offer.
Yeah, no, definitely. That would be a travesty. I think he's tailor-made to be a great coach. He's been coached by Alan Story in recent years, who's got the most out of him and managed to, among other things, get him through to that really memorable Olympic trials marathon win at Kew Gardens, which you mentioned earlier on. So I think Tomo's had a few coaches over the years as well. He's had influences from people like Mark Rowland and guys like John Nuttall have helped him. So I'm sure he'll bring all of those experiences to his own coaching career. He'll use a lot of their lessons in his own coaching strategies.
Yeah, and Chris also mentioned in the clips there about how athletics is about so much more than just world records and times, and how it's tried for so long to sell the sort of sport off the back of performance. But his feeling is that it needs more than that. And we're at a time now where there's a lot of talk about innovation and how athletics sort of changes with the times. We've got obviously projects like Grand Slam Track, led by Michael Johnson, which will come to the fore next year. We've had things in the recent past, I guess, things like Nitro Athletics. That was given 1 year. The Athletics World Cup in the UK was given one shot, but that made significant losses as we found out. But this isn't the first time new things are being tried. It seems to come back around again. This is a recurring theme, really.
Yeah, I think you've got to try new things. I think if you don't innovate, then what's the point? I mean, just to carry on doing the same things over and over again, life becomes a bit boring. But I have to say, I'm personally a bit of a traditionalist. I quite like the just old-fashioned basic athletics. That's just the simple art of running, jumping, and throwing. I think if you start to stray too far away from there, then it's you sometimes in danger of it not being athletics anymore. Basically, of course, things like Grand Slam Track are, that's athletics for sure. But part of the reason I'm dubious is that we've seen lots of these things in years gone by. I mean, you mentioned a couple there with Nitro from back in 2017, where Usain Bolt was involved, and they just didn't work.
Well, thanks again, Jason, for joining me, and we'll be back next month for more from the Athletics Weekly podcast. In the meantime, as we said, the November issue of AW is out now, available via athleticsweekly.com or selected retailers. You can also keep right up to date with the latest athletics news by heading to athleticsweekly.com and following the AW social media channels. Finally, please like and subscribe to the AW podcast on your usual podcast platform. See you next time.